My name is Devasher Chaudhary. Sir, as you already mentioned that you're compassionate about the Pashtuns, and as we see in India that Pashtuns are said as descendants of, as viewed as descendants of Mughals, and they're all activities which they perform in their territory. So, what are your views on that Pashtuns have contributed to the world that are benefited from it?
Contribution to the Pashtuns.
Yes, benefited the world.
There have been two presidents in Pakistan and in India. You know which is the Pashtun president in India?
No, sir. I know.
Zakir Hussain and Ghulam Ishaq Khan. Um, Squash players, for example, in Pakistan, Jahangir Khan and Jamshed Khan. Cricket team. So many actors. You know, so Pashtun contribution has been tremendous. Poetry. I keep referring back to poetry. Yes, they haven't been scientists, because the education that was taught was very limited. It was madrasa education, and so there was no scientific development. But other than that, a lot of contribution.
Friends, we at VLF function on lines similar to other established festivals across the country, with the difference that we host non-fiction writing authors. In continuum to our tradition, non-fiction in action, we organized successful year-long run-up events, and today marks the day one of the 2 days long annual conclave for literature lover. And this is the third session of day one. In this spectacular annual literary festival, you, the dearest audience, are in for the sweetest treat, wherein you will witness visionary discussions encompassing various walks of life, from business to culinary skills, history to current affairs, corporate affairs to cinema and sports, banking and finance, etc. With a heartfelt of gratitude, we thank all our partners for making this event a dream turned into reality. Mahametro, Infoceps, Foundations, Crossword, Essay Digital Firms, Naivedyam, SMS Envocare, Persistent, AD Photography, Prabha Khaitan Foundation, Alag Angle, Help Links, and Billboards. Without these people, without these organizations, it was impossible to meet all you authors and audience. Now, I request everyone to allow some rest to your digital gadgets and switch them off. Now, with distractions out, I hope you will garner life-altering wisdom from the upcoming conversations. Let's widen our horizons and embrace some new perspectives. I take the opportunity to introduce our session moderator, Ms. Tasneem Akulawala. She is Chief Mentor at Butterfly Achievers, a grammar and vocabulary specialist. She has trained innumerable students from boards like CBSE, ICSE, and IGCSE. She has guided professionals for enhancement of communication skills, interview proficiency, and exams like IELTS, TOEFL, CAT, GMAT, etc. Madam has delivered lectures for the same in various colleges affiliated to RTM Nagpur University. She is a voracious reader and a member of a closed non-fiction book club. She is also a committee member of VLF. Welcome, Madam Tasneem Akulawala, for an interesting session. Friends, now it's time to meet our author for the session, writer of the Pashtuns, a contested history, Mr. Tilak Devasher. He is member of the National Security Advisory Board, also a prominent author, TV panelist, and a sought-after orator. Mr. Tilak Devasher is a consultant with the Vivekanand International Foundation, Distinguished Fellow, United Services Institution, and Emeritus Faculty Member, Rashtriya Raksha University. He is a former Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, Government of India. During his professional career, he specialized in security issues, especially pertaining to India's neighborhood. He is the author of Pakistan Courting the Abyss 2016, published in 2016, Pakistan at the Helm, published in 2018, and Pakistan, the Balochistan Conundrum, July 2019, and the latest creation, The Pashtuns, A Contested History, in his most published in 2022. Mr. Tilak has taken to writing after his superannuation. Apart from his books, he has many articles for a host of newspapers, magazines, and think tank journals to his credit. Sir is a regular contributor to renowned newspapers like Indian Express, Tribune, and India Today, to name a few. He is a renowned face for TV shows talking mainly about security issues. Sir, we are really honored to have you here to talk about your recent work. Now, I take the opportunity to invite our guest and session moderator to the dais, and I request session moderator, Madam Tasneema Kolawala, to take our guest to the dais. Please give them a big applause. We welcome you, sir. Thank you. Now dais is all for Madam Tasneem.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Honorable Tilak Devasher ji, one of the leading experts on Pakistan. He is a prolific writer and has authored 3 books on Pakistan, filling a critical void. In your 4th book, Tilak ji, The Pashtuns, A Contested History, with your exhaustive research and brilliant analysis, you have provided readers with unrivaled knowledge on a relatively unexplored subject. The Pashtuns. We call them the Pathans. Sir refers to them only as the Pashtuns. Sir, you have dissected the historical, cultural, and ideological details of the Pashtuns on both sides of the Druin line. We'll come to that question because we need some understanding on that from Sir. Sir has provided us a comprehensive portrayal of the Pashtun character. So now I begin with the first question after the brief introduction. Sir, why did you write a book on the Pashtuns? And can you explain the title? What is so contested about their history?
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Yes. Thank you. When I was growing up, I knew 3 things about the Pashtuns or the Pathans, as they're called in India. One was Rabindranath Tagore's famous Kabuliwala. The second was India's first fairness cream. It was called Afghan Snow, a name that was given by King Zahir Shah. And the third was Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, a larger-than-life figure, friend of Mahatma Gandhi, and a votary of non-violence. All these were benign images. And Bollywood pitched in too with the depiction of the Pathan as a friend, especially of the oppressed and of women, and a host of actors that claim their ancestry from the Pathans. So, but when I grew up and came into university and started working, the violence in Afghanistan and in the tribal areas really stunned me. I thought to myself, what went wrong? That impression that I had as a child growing up, and the violence, it just doesn't square up. So I thought I must write about this. And another reason was that the Pashtuns matter, and they matter vitally. Without a key understanding of their trends amongst the Pashtuns, about their history, about 2 key forces, Pashtun nationalism and Pashtun extremism, violence and insecurity will continue in this very vital area, which has been called the crossroads of Asia. And violence and insecurity in this area will radiate outwards, lead to drugs, lead to refugees, and to ungoverned spaces in which international terrorists would incubate. I thought I must write about them. About the contested history. Now that's an interesting question because, and the reason I wrote this contested is that through the ages, the region of Pashtunistan, which current present-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, has seen more invasions than any other part of the world. Right from the Persians, the Greeks, the Sakas, the Kushans, the Huns, the Arabs, the Mongols, the Turks, the Mughals, the British, the Soviets, the United States. This region has seen it all. Every invader that has come has tried to defeat and subdue the Afghans, and not very successfully. None of them have succeeded. That's why this land is also called the graveyard of empires. And the reason is that the Pashtuns had no concept of defeat in the classical sense. They know how to run, they know how to hide, they know when to talk, and they know when to fight, but all in Afghan time. So you can't beat a people who have this kind of a concept. And moreover, the various invasions that have taken place have bred a very tough and hardy people with a unique way of life and a unique way of living. So, when we try and judge the Pashtuns from our standards, and you say they are violent, they are this and that, you must realize where they're coming from. Centuries upon centuries of conflict and contestation. That's why I use the title, A Contested History.
True, their region is contested. So, sir, in your book you talk about the Pashto. You have quoted a few Pashto sayings. I'm going to quote one from there. It says, Afghan baki, kohsar baki, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Now the saying means, the Pashto saying means that the Pashtuns and their mountains will keep standing as long as praise be to Allah. So this, from my understanding, sir, says that the Pashtuns are very people full of gratitude. They are happy in every sense, irrespective of whatever they think. According to you, what are the Pashtuns like?
Yeah, it's again a quirk of history that bulk of the writings of what we know about the Pashtuns comes from British writings during the colonial period, and where the Pashtuns were in conflict with the British. The first person who got in contact with the Pashtuns was in 1809, Elphinstone. He went and met Shah Shuja in the court in Peshawar. His view of the Pashtuns was very benign. These are good people, they believe in hospitality, things like that. Because that time Britain wanted to have a treaty relations with the Pashtuns. When they became masters after 1849 and took over Pashtun lands, then there was a century of conflict with the Pashtuns, especially in the tribal areas, and there were 3 wars with Afghanistan. The whole attitude changed. Then the Pashtun was seen as hostile, as somebody who would not give up his territory and lie down in front of the British. And if you allow me, I'll just quote. So there was this British author called Denzel Ebiston, and he described the Pashtuns as most barbaric of all races, bloodthirsty, vindictive, and bigoted. Winston Churchill called them animal-like, and he also wrote that every man's hand is against the other and all against a stranger. Another, Dr. Pennell, noted that Afghans are never at peace among themselves except when they are at war. Arthur Swinson, another officer, the Pathans are possibly the most ferocious, independent and warlike race known. So these are all colonial depictions of the Pashtuns. Unfortunately, there is no counter-narrative. We have no writings from the Pashtuns about what the Pashtun thought about the British, or what the Pashtuns thought about other Pashtuns. There are 2 exceptions that I came across. One was Ghaffar Khan, and I'll just read something from what Ghaffar Khan said. Very touching and poignant. He says the doors are shut upon us, none is allowed to reach us, and we have been presented as a collection of uncivilized wild tribes. The courage of our tribal brothers is described as wildness, passion for freedom as lawlessness, their proverbial hospitality as an irrepressible urge for begging, borrowing, and pillaging. Unquote. And one of his famous sayings was, the Pathan will go to hell with you if you can win his heart, but even to heaven you cannot force him to go. Such is the power of love over the Pashtuns. But actually it is Ghaffar Khan's son, Ghani Khan, who was a poet, who has given the best description of the Pathan. Again, let me quote. He says that the Pathan is not easy to love because he takes a lot of knowing, and his is the most complicated simplicity. Among his traits is a love of fighting, but he hates being a soldier, a love of music, but contempt for the musician, a temperamental neighbor who could become a loving friend or a deadly enemy. He knows no happy medium. Though kind and gentle with a tender heart, he dislikes showing it and tries to hide it under a rough and gruff exterior. He is too good a fighter to leave his weakest part uncovered. Don't be so sweet, he says, that people may swallow you up, nor so bitter that people may spit you out. He keeps a rough face because he does not want you to see his soft eyes. He would rather you thought he was a rogue than to let you see him weep his eyes out for a wife. And he carries on in this manner. So, you have these two totally stark contradictions or different views of what the Pashtun is really like. It all depends on who was writing and with what motive was he writing about the Pashtuns. And especially because the Pashtuns, we talk about invasions of India. But before people came to India, they had to traverse Afghanistan. So Afghanistan has really been brutalized over the centuries. And even now in the last 50 years of constant fighting. That is why it has developed such a tough people with a unique way of, as I said, living. And that's why these constant different traits are there.
Exactly, as sir said, it depends on the perspective who's writing about the Pashtuns. So for me, Pashtuns was like for us like Pathan, Shah Rukh Khan is the Pathan, Kabuliwala, as sir said. For me also first instinct was Kabuliwala. Now when I read sir's book, he in detail talks about the Pathans, their ways, how they behave, how patient they are. They can wait for years to take revenge, but the saying tells me that they are a gratified people. So we really need to read the book, which is one of a kind, where we get an entire understanding of the Pashtuns who are completely misunderstood. So as sir said, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who is also a Pashtun. Now I was born way before after the partition. But still, when we say the word Abdul Ghaffar Khan, there is some kind of a bell that rings in the mind. Some kind of a bell which associates that name with the freedom fight and the association with Mahatma. So sir, exactly how was Abdul Ghaffar Khan implemental in the fight for independence, in India's fight for independence?
Two things. One, we all know Ghaffar Khan's non-violence. And for him, it was an article of faith, just as it was for Gandhiji. And Ghaffar Khan's whole philosophy was that if the Pashtuns were to carry on one of their most significant traits, which is badal or revenge, the revenge that lasts for generations, the Pashtun society is going to be damaged very severely. So he taught non-violence. He said that it's a Pashtun who is violent knows the virtue of non-violence. And because the Pashtun is brave, he needs to be even braver to have non-violence when faced with violence.
It's very contradictory.
Very?
Contradictory for a Pashtun to be non-violent.
So people were surprised. In fact, the British didn't believe that a Pathan could be non-violent. And for them, a non-violent Pathan was far more dangerous than an armed Pathan. You see, an armed Pathan, if he picks up a gun, you go after him. But a non-violent Pathan, who is not attacking you, but just protesting for his rights, is far more dangerous. And the same thing is happening in Pakistan today. You'll find the peaceful protests, like the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, or this Baloch Yakteti Council. The Pakistan army doesn't know how to deal with it. Similarly happened in East Pakistan. You see, when Mujibur Rahman pressed his demands, As the saying goes, that if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So the only way the Pakistan army could react, and the British for the same thing, they would sort of hit out and try and hit them. So that is a non-violence. And that's how we came into touch with Gandhiji. And the two, I think, supported each other and became a very effective force. Therefore, you will find that in two elections in NWFP, in 1937 and in 1946, the Congress, Khudai Khidmatgars, won. Even though 96% of the population of the then NWFP was Muslim. But you found that the Chief Minister was Khan Saab, Ghaffar Khan's elder brother. The second aspect of this mentioned partition, and so that is a very unfortunate part, I think, of Indian history. A lot of people don't know about that, and I think it's important that we know. You see, NWFP was an oddity for the Congress, for the Muslim League, and for the British. It was a 96% Muslim majority, as I mentioned, with the Congress government. Therefore, the Congress, it was very important that it stays with the Congress to prove the Congress's claim that it represented all of India. For the same reason, the Muslim League couldn't claim to represent all of India's Muslims if NWFP was not in the Muslim League. Likewise, the British had a similar problem, that their whole plan for partition was a Hindu India and a Muslim Pakistan. So much so that Lord Wavell, Mountbatten's aide, Lord Ismay, called it a bastard situation that the Muslim majority people had voted the Congress into government. So they said this verdict has to be changed, otherwise the whole partition plan will fall flat. So even though the elections had been held in 46, Mountbatten said, no, we must have a referendum in 1947 to decide whether the people want India or Pakistan, because if the decision was left to the assembly to vote on, they may well have voted for India. All the other assemblies in India were given the option of, as per the partition plan, that you vote either for India or Pakistan. And the British felt that if the NWFP assembly was given this option, they could well vote for India, and then the whole partition plan would fall flat. So he convinced Nehru to hold a referendum. And for reasons that are not explained, or I don't want to go into, Nehru and the Congress agreed. And they agreed without taking Ghaffar Khan and his brother into confidence. So when this resolution was passed in the Congress, Ghaffar Khan told Gandhiji, "Aapne to hame bhediyon ke aage phenk diya, that you have thrown us to the wolves." And Gandhiji said, look, if ever you are in trouble or the Pakistan doesn't treat you well, India will come to your aid. Then Khan said, what will happen to your non-violence? So Gandhiji said, I am non-violent. The government of India is not non-violent. So later on, Ghaffar Khan told Pyarelal in Kabul in the 60s that Gandhiji's promise to us has not been kept. And India owes us to make amends. And that promise still lies unfulfilled. Who knows in the future what India may do, but that promise is on the table, not having been. So that was a tragic part of partition.
But sir, sir is doing his bit to help the Pashtuns by writing this book, a very big bit. And sir is also an avid tweeter. He tweets about how the Baloch and the Pashtuns are not being given their fair deal. So the Pashtun...
That's my very small contribution, but I think we need to do much more.
So the way of the Pashtun is the Pashtun Wali. The Pashtun Wali is, as I was reading the book, I felt it is very close to Islam, and sir, you have done quite a lot of detail with you. You have written about their way of Islam. So if you could throw some light in short about it.
You see, Pashtun Wali, the way of the Pashtun, is a set of unwritten norms, codes, whatever you call it, which define what is a Gairatmand Pashtun, a Pashtun who leads a totally honorable life. And at its base, or at its core, it is about honor, or Nang, based on the triangle of Zan, Zar, Zameen, women, wealth, and land. And of course, I've written in detail in the book, but just three major elements of Pashtun Wali. One is the concept of revenge, second is the concept of hospitality or Melmasti, and the third is the concept of shelter, Nanvati. Now, revenge is an fundamental part of Pashtun culture. As the saying goes, he's not a Pashtun who does not give a blow for a pinch. And there is no time limit for revenge. The Pashtun who said he took revenge after 100 years and he took it too quickly. And similarly like Melmastia. But Melmastia and Refu, Nanmati, they at times trump revenge. If an enemy comes to the Pashtun's house seeking refuge and shelter, he cannot deny it. He will have to look after his enemy, feed him, equip him, and then let him go, and maybe outside he will go and kill him later on. But so long as he's given him refuge, he will continue to help him. The best example or the latest example of this is when Mullah Omar, the Taliban leader, refused to hand over Osama bin Laden to the West. He even refused to hand him over to other Muslim countries because the ulama told him that you must at least hand him over to Muslim countries for trial. And he said no. He said, as per the principles of Pashtun Wali, he has sought shelter. I will not listen to Sharia, but I will this Pashtun Wali is far more important for me. But see, Pashtun Wali is much older than Islam. As Wali Khan said in the National Assembly, I have been a Pashtun for 4,000 years, a Musalman for 1,200, and a Pakistani only for 40 years. So for him, his ethnic identity, and Pashtun Wali is a very important part of the ethnic identity, is much older than Islam. But how the Pashtuns sort of rationalize the two, that they have the firm belief that there was one common ancestor of all the Pashtuns, Qais Abdul Rashid, who went to Mecca during the lifetime of the Prophet, was converted to Islam by the Prophet, and he came back to Gaur and spread the religion. He had 4 sons, 3 natural, 1 adopted. And through them, the various tribes and sub-tribes of the Pashtuns have started. So the Pashtun says that I am the most loyal of the Prophet's subjects. I was converted by him. So whatever I believe has Islamic sanction. So they treat Pashtun Wali and Islam as 2 sides of the same coin. But there are major differences between Islam and Pashtun Wali. Differences, for example, revenge. Whereas Islam teaches forgiveness, here the revenge goes on for generation after generation. Treatment of women, women's inheritance. And there are whole host of issues. So what the Pashtun would say, as the saying goes, he follows only half the Quran. And if there's a minor transgression, I'm sure Allah will forgive us because we are his best of his subjects. So there are differences, but the Pashtun sort of rationalizes his belief.
So as Sir says, that for the Pashtuns, their land comes before their religion. It should be the same for everybody. Now the Pashtuns, Sir has said in detail that Sir has said in detail in the book that the Pashtuns follow the Deobandi set of Islam, wherein they wear the taweez and they visit graves also. So I was surely shocked and impressed by Sir's understanding of a completely different tribe and a completely different religion and the intricate detail. So anybody, before I will say this again and again, this book seems huge, but it is a fantastically easy read about someone whom you have no clue about and whom you really need to know about. Why? We'll come to that question next. Now the Pashtuns have this jirga system. In India we have the panchayat. They have the jirga system. Sir, please enlighten us.
You see, the jirga, at the time when there were no courts, jirga is a dispute resolution mechanism. Every village has it. Group of villages will. So whenever there's a particular issue or a dispute in the village, the entire village sits together in a circle. There is no leader, there is no headman, there is no nothing. Everybody sits together. Everybody has a right to speak, and decisions are arrived at by consensus. Once a decision is arrived, everybody has to follow it. The person who does not follow it will have a very tough time. Let's put it simply. So, and likewise the jirga, there is another institution among the Pashtuns which is called the hujra. The hujra is, every house has a hujra. It's a kind of a baithak. People will come out and after the day's work is done, sit around smoking on a charpai, smoking a hookah and discuss the day's problem. The couple of families will have a common hujra. The village will have their own hujra. So hujra and jirga, these are the 2 institutions, local institutions among the Pashtuns. And at a higher level, you have a bigger jirga, and then at the national level, you have what's called a lower jirga. And the decisions of a Loya Jirga are absolutely sacrosanct. And if we talk about the Durand Line and tell you about the Loya Jirga, which was held in 1949, whose decisions are valid even till today. So it is a dispute. It's not a mechanism for justice, but it is to dispute because they know that if a dispute is not resolved, it will lead to enmity, which will carry on for generations. So the idea is to nip it in the bud.
Loya Jirga, very historical moment. Sir has denoted a lot of chapters on that. Now, moving on to relating and connecting Nagpur with the Pashtuns. So, sir, in Nagpur, at the time of partition, we have a set of people who moved in an area of Nagpur which is called Mekosabag, and they are the Punjabis who were Pashto speaking. These Punjabis are followers of Sanatan Dharma, and they have this custom of erecting the Ravan effigy and conducting the entire organization to the ceremony every single year since the past 72 years. And I have a few friends from the Punjabi Mekosabag society, and they tell me that their forefathers were very fluent in Pashto. So their great grandfathers would write, जैसे हिसाब लिखते हैं. So like how we speak Sindhi or Gujarati or Marathi in the office, they would speak in Pashto in front of their servants so that it is not understood, which is so fantastic that Pashto is alive in Nagpur also. So about the language, sir.
I met a scholar, a Pashto scholar in Kabul, and he told me that the original and most important documentation of Pashto history are actually in India. Not in libraries or in museums, but in private collections. He said there's so much of Pashto material to build the history and the understanding of the Pashtos. And he mentioned Nagpur as one of those places where it was there. Yes. So there have been so many other kingdoms. Bhopal is another area which was a Pashto kingdom. You had the Rohilas, you had Rampur and places like that. Farokhabad is another place. So a lot of documentation is there. Unfortunately, I don't think so Pashto is being taught in India. And that's a big, big lacuna. That when you meet somebody and if you're able to converse in his language, it makes it so much of a difference. And hopefully some of them would start, if they're not already teaching the younger generation Pashto. Because, I also very fond of Pashto. I don't know it. But when you read the poetry of Kushal Khan Khattak, for example, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. The nationalist fervor in his poetry. So I came to Pashto from reading about Kushal Khan Khattak, but in English.
Okay, that's fantastic. Now coming back to the core of the book. The book is extensive, beautifully written. It flows very easily. Even for a layman like me, I could understand. Now, sir talks about the Druid line. The Druid line, all of us have heard about it, but we are going to make sir explain to us what it is.
Yeah, I think the Druid line is a fundamental construct on what is happening even today. It was an agreement signed in 1893 between the Amir Abdul Rahman and the British India Foreign Secretary, Mortimer Durand. It actually demarcated spheres of influence. Now, this is important to understand. It demarcated spheres of influence. And later on, it was only at the time of partition where from the sphere of influence, the British started calling it an international boundary. And I'll explain to you the reasons for that. There are many controversial aspects about the Durand line, which I think are relevant even today, which is that why would a Pashtun Amir give up a large portion of his territory and population to the British? And the reason for this, he writes in his autobiography, he didn't think it was a permanent cessation of territory because it was spheres of influence. Even the British, even Mortimer Durand, when he wrote back, he said it was spheres of influence. We are not taking over any additional territory or responsibility. So that's one controversial, how it was changed. The second, when Mortimer Durand met him, it was agreed that the text in Persian of any treaty they signed would be final and binding. Because Durand knew Persian and Amir Abdul Rahman did not know English. But Mortimer Durand made him sign the English version of the treaty and not the Persian version. And why this was done, again, is inexplicable. and he did not sign on the map. Now, even a common understanding, if you don't sign on a map, the treaty by itself is meaningless unless you sign on the map. Third, before at the time of partition, when the British made known that they would be leaving, the Afghan government had made it clear before August 47 that in the referendum which was going to be held, there should be an option for Pashtunistan, either an independent entity or part of Afghanistan. The British declined, and even Pandit Nehru didn't want an option of independence to be given to any of the states. So the Afghans argued that a treaty which the British had made with us in 1893, how can you pass on those territories to a country that did not even exist at that time and was created only in 1947? How can you do that? And legally, the argument is in the Afghans' favor, because even the UN decided that the legal opinion of the UN was sought, and they said Pakistan is a new state. It is not an inheritor of the British Empire. So these are the controversial issues about the Durand Line. The last treaty between the British India and Afghanistan was the 1921 Treaty of Kabul. One thing which it mentioned, that the treaty is valid only for 3 years, and after 3 years, giving 12 months notice, any of the two sides can rescind the treaty. In 1949, so after Pakistan came into creation, they did not have any exchange of letters, or neither of the two sides accepted the past treaties. In 1949, Pakistani Air Force had bombed part of the territory in Afghanistan. Afghanistan called a Loya Jirga. This is where the Loya Jirga comes in 1949. And they rescinded the Treaty of Kabul, the Durand Line Agreement, 1879 Treaty of Gandhabad, and everything else. So as far as the Afghans are concerned, there was no border with Pakistan. And no Afghan government after 1949, whether it was a monarchy, whether it was a communist, Mujahideen, Taliban, Karzai, Ghani, Taliban again, have accepted the boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan. For them, there is no border. Now, this has created insecurity in Pakistan. That if they don't accept that there is this border, tomorrow a strong Pashtun government in Kabul can reclaim this land, which was taken by the Sikhs, handed over to the British, and the British handed over to Pakistan. So their policy, because of the Durand Line, is always geared to having a weak and dependent government in Kabul.
So they are dividing the Pashtuns, using this line to divide the Pashtuns.
The British had already divided them because they were the settled areas and they were the tribal areas, and there was, so the Pashtuns are already divided. As I mentioned in my book, it is the largest tribal population in the world without a country of their own. But despite this division, they have common linkages, common culture, common religion, common code, ethnic linkages, familial linkages, which makes it easy to see them as one people divided into two countries. And the Pashtuns being one Qaum is best expressed by the Pashto phrase, Laro bar yo Afghan. That is, Pashtun in the lowlands of Pakistan or the highlands of Afghanistan are one. And this is also the slogan of the Pashtun, the Hafuz movement, that high or low, Afghans are one.
High or low, Afghan is one. Now, next question is it is a bit in-depth question, sir. If you could explain the move of and the growth of the Pashtuns from the Mujahideen to Al-Qaeda to Taliban.
Okay. That's a long question. So let me try and put it very briefly. See, when the communist government overthrew Daud's republic and killed him and his family, there was resistance from some people, especially in Herat and other places. And this was gradually building up. Many of them sought shelter in Pakistan when the communist government came. And Pakistan started training them. And till they'll go back and use it against, because Daud was a big votary of Pashtunistan. And they started under Bhutto. But when the Soviet Union invaded in 1979, and that time Zia had overthrown Bhutto, it was a great opportunity for him to get US support, because he knew the US would want to sort of pay back the Soviet Union in the same coin which they had got from the Soviet Union in Vietnam. So that people who resisted the communists both under Bhutto and more under Zia, came to be called the Mujahideen. And there were 7 parties, 6 were Pashtun and 1 was a Tajik party. And they continued fighting because of the support of the US and Saudi Arabia. And ultimately, the Soviet Union knew they were being bled dry. So when Gorbachev came on the scene, he decided to withdraw. In 1989, the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan. For the US, they had secured the military objective of bogging the Soviet Union down and damaging their economy a lot. But for Zia, this was only a partial objective. His real objective was to set up a confederation of Afghanistan and Pakistan so that no Afghan government in future could exercise any revanchist claims on the Pashtun territory in Pakistan. He, however, failed because the Mujahideen parties were unable to come to any agreement. And much to Pakistan's disappointment, the Tajiks, Burhanuddin Rabbani and Ahmad Shah Massoud came into power in Kabul. Their favorite, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was a Pashtun, was not able to control Kabul. It was then, because of the civil war and uncertain conditions, a small force, which was led by Mullah Omar and came to be called the Taliban, arose in Kandahar. This was quite apart from what Pakistan. Later on, with Pakistan's support, they spread all over and they came to capture Kabul. So that was the Taliban. In the process, during the Afghan Jihad, Zia had encouraged a whole lot of Arab fighters to come and fight in the Jihad. And one such man who came was Osama bin Laden. And what Pakistan did not realize, that by getting these Islamic fighters and supporting them, who stayed on after the US left, they were creating the next phase of the insurgency. We all know what happened in 9/11 and the US invasion. 20 years Pakistan supported the Taliban and they came back into power in 2021. But meantime, Al-Qaeda had grown in strength. And there was also the Daesh, the Islamic State of Khorasan province, ISKP, as it is called in this area. So the next stage of terrorism continued in this. So you have the Mujahideen, you have the Taliban, you have the Al-Qaeda, and in all this, Pakistan has played a very dubious role because they thought they could control this. You see, what Pakistan didn't realize then, it does not realize today, that an Afghan is first of all a nationalist and last of all a nationalist. He will not toe anybody's line. If his national interest is something, he will follow that, even if it means like Mullah Omar. He gave up his government because he said, I'm not going to release Osama bin Laden. So as a result, there has been total amount of, so much of destruction, terrorism. Pakistan says 80,000 people have died, so many of them civilians. And the tragedy is that bulk of the people who are killing are Pashtuns. Out of the 7 Mujahideen parties, 6 were Pashtun. Those whom they are killing are also Pashtuns. And even children, Pashtun children have not been spared. And the fighting is continuing. So all this is as a result of Pakistan's sort of policy.
So because of that, Pashtuns are going against Pashtuns. It is a very sad thing to read also and listen from Sir. So you have dedicated 2 chapters on the United States. One is 1.0, which goes from 1979 to 1996, and then next chapter is the US intervention from 2001 to 21. And I literally laughed when I read that America was here for 2 decades and all they had was 1-year plans. Every time 1-year plans. And Sir has given in detail the American fiasco, what they did and what went wrong. Please, Sir.
Yeah, so it's history currently being written about. A lot of scholars are working on the fact that why did the US lose? What happened? So I've mentioned my preliminary sort of findings. See, initially when the Americans came, even though they were a foreign force, they were welcomed by the people of Afghanistan because they wanted to get rid of the Taliban. And the one thing they wanted the most was law and order. Unfortunately, the US deployed initially only 7,004 troops in a country the size of France. And because it had such a light footprint, it allowed the Taliban to regroup and come back. By 2003, the Taliban were back. Second, the US lacked a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. They didn't understand what was Pashtunwali. They did not know what was the intertribal relationship. So they just went in with almost blind. Even the US troops deploying to the Afghanistan did not have a clear idea what Afghan culture was. Then they kept changing military commanders, different policies. Bush had one, then Obama had another one, then Trump had another one. So for all these various reasons, the Afghan, and you rightly mentioned, instead of one 20-year plan, that are you going to rebuild Afghanistan? Are you only counter-terrorism? Is it counter-insurgency? What are you trying to do? They didn't have a clear idea. So instead of one 20-year plan, they had 21-year plans. And in a country like Afghanistan, they said that you may have the watches, but we have the time. So they were bound to lose.
Yes, it was hilarious to read and very enjoyable. So, sir, now moving on to the last question. After that, we will open the forum for Q&A to the audience. The last question is a bit sensitive, sir. At a time when a Pathan outfit can be threatening for people, you are compassionate towards the Pathans. How come, sir?
As I mentioned, I think the Pathans have been misunderstood. And the kind of violence they've had to face over centuries, especially in the last 50 years. Somebody needs to step back and say something positive about the Pathans. Because after all, let's not forget, they have been emperors in India. They have 3 dynasties of Pashtuns who are in India. There must be something in their character, something in their history. So instead of the colonial depiction, which treats them as barbarians, animal-like, always looking at violence, there is much more to them. And especially, they may not have literature written, but they have poetry. So if you read the poetry, you realize the sentiments, compassion comes from the tragedy and the misery. I think people have been unfair to the Pashtuns. People don't know about the Pashtuns. And that's why you say I'm compassionate. So I thought I was being pretty objective, not really. I'm not writing biased for the Pashtuns, but I just want the world to understand what the Pashtuns is much more than sheer violence and aggression.
The book cover reflects...
And one other thing, we forget. Afghanistan, or the area in Afghanistan today, was a very important center of Sufi culture. Whether it is Herat, whether it is Ghazni. The most important Sufi saint of Pakistan, Data Ganj Bakhsh, is actually the grave of an Afghan Sufi from Ghazni who came here in the 10th century, settled there, was buried there and became so famous that people go, it's the most popular Sufi shrine. Similarly, in Herat was called Khake-Auliya, the dust of Sufi saints. It is this Sufi culture which has been destroyed. And there's something that needs to be revived in Afghanistan. And maybe so many reasons why I feel compassionate about the Pashtuns.
The book cover reflects the pride, determination, and agony of the Pashtuns who have suffered decades of wars. The structure of the book is well conceived, covering a large canvas for deep understanding of the subject. Sir's book analyzes the strengths and weaknesses of the Pashtuns and the role of US and Pakistan in detail. If the Pashtuns are ever to find peace and tranquility they long for, they will themselves have to find answers for their predicament and not depend on others to do so. On that note, we open the round to the audience for Q&A.
Thank you, sir. So my question would be, so first and foremost, I resonate. I've traveled a lot in that region, west of Pakistan and deep into Afghanistan. Beautiful people, right? I really understand them. But the thing that I grapple with, I don't know if your book covers this, that we tend to see it black and white in terms of religion and a tribe, a region, right? So when we say Pashtun, immediately we think Pashtuns, all Islamic, and that's how the world sees it, right? But when you go and meet the living Hindus and Sikhs, whether in Afghanistan or Parachinar and way beyond Peshawar, they are the same people, right? So where does this, in your view, the differentiation comes in? Because we tend to take religion to differentiate people then.
See, this is because of the last 30 or 40 years of history. As I mentioned, the core value of the Pashtuns is Pashtunwali, which predates Islam by thousands of years, right? So, because of, you see again, Pakistan's role, ever since Ghaffar Khan raised the issue of Pashtunistan, Pakistan has been very insecure about its borders. So what Zia especially did was to try and convert Pashtun nationalism into Pashtun radicalism by infusing it with religion and the importation of Wahhabi culture during the jihad, and the madrasas that were set up were all taught Wahhabi rather than the traditional Deobandi and Sufi. So you'll find the religiosity or the religion being given much more prominence is something of the last 30 years. You know, after when the Soviet jihad started. And they were successful. To a large extent, the Pashtuns switched to radicalism. But as Wali Khan made a very interesting observation, he said this fire you're now lighting among the Pashtuns will one day cross Atak and burn Pakistan. And this is exactly what is happening. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is a Pakistan-based group, is now demanding that you said jihad was okay in Afghanistan. Why isn't jihad valid in Pakistan? So it has come full circle and it's coming back to bite them. So the difference is because of the greatest stress on religion during the last 30 to 40 years. It wasn't there earlier. You see, in the place where there were least amount of riots in 1947 was NWFP because of the presence of Khyber, Khudai Khidmatgars, and the fact there was a Congress government. If they were all that radicalized, they should have had much more violent riots than what Punjab did. But they didn't. Because similarly in Balochistan, in fact the Baloch Hindus took sanctuary with the Bhuktis and they protected them. But when you infuse a traditional tribal culture with radicalization and bring ideologies which are not native, the Wahhabi culture, this is the kind of thing that happened.
So my name is Devasher. Sir, as you already mentioned that you're compassionate about the Pashtuns, and as we see in India that Pashtuns are said as descendants of, as viewed as descendants of Mughals, and they're all activities which they perform in their territory. So what are your views on that Pashtuns have contributed to the world that are benefited from it?
Contribution to the Pashtuns?
Yes, benefited the world.
There have been two presidents in Pakistan and in India. You know which is the Pashtun president in India?
No, sir. I know.
Zakir Hussain and Ghulam Ishaq Khan. Squash players, for example, in Pakistan, Jahangir Khan and Jamshed Khan. Cricket team. So many actors. Pashtun contribution has been tremendous. Poetry, I keep referring back to poetry. Yes, they haven't been scientists, because the education that was taught was very limited. It was a madrasa education, and so there was no scientific development. But other than that, a lot of contribution.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, can you please enlighten us about the origin of the word Pashtun or Pathan, and is there any special reason why you prefer the word Pashtun over the commonly used Pathan?
Yeah, you see, so the word Pashtun, the Persians were the first who came in touch, and their word for Pashtun was Afghan or Afghana. So they came to be called Afghans. The British made a distinction. They would call Pashtuns who were closer in touch with Persia and spoke Dari. Dari is the Afghan version of Persian. And those Pashtuns who were in touch with India and the Mughals and spoke Pashto, they called them Pathan. So in the subcontinent, they came to be called Pathan, whereas in their territory and in Persia, they were called Pashtun or Afghan. Then when Amir Abdul Rahman became the Amir, he passed an edict that all people living in the territory of Afghanistan are henceforth Afghan. So the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Hazaras, all started being called Afghan, and the Pashtuns started being called Pashtuns. So that distinction came. So during the Constituent Assembly, Ghaffar Khan was asked this question, that is the Pashtun a name of a tribe? Who are you? Then he explained that we are the name of a community and we'll call our land Pashtunistan. And we want self-governance and so on. So, this distinction, this confusion is there. So I have used the word Pashtun and Pashto. So even in the dialects, the southern dialect is softer. They say Pashtun. The northern dialect says Pakhtun. And they call it Pakhto, whereas the south call it Pashto. My personal preference was Pashto and Pashtuns.
Sir, presently Afghanistan is ruled by Taliban. So, in this context, what is the present India-Afghanistan relations are there? How you can you describe it now?
Yeah, you see, we have since last year opened a technical mission in Kabul to look after the massive amount of assistance that we are giving. We're giving 50,000 tons of wheat. We're given 500,000 COVID vaccinations. And recently we have supplied them with pesticides. So to monitor all that, we have a technical office. We have not recognized them, and we will not break the international consensus on recognizing the Taliban. But you have to live with reality. You have to live in your national interest. Our national interest in Afghanistan is that we've had very strong civilizational links with the Pashtuns and people north of the Hindu Kush also, the Tajiks, Hazaras and Uzbeks. We don't want to give that up. So people-to-people contact, we're very strong on. We're also concerned about that the ungoverned spaces in Afghanistan will be used by Pakistan to set up camps of the Lashkar or the Jaish, which will then target India. So we need to sensitize the Taliban that we don't want this to happen. So that is the current state of our relationship with the Taliban. The Taliban are very keen that we restart projects, and Mullah Yaqub even said that we will send our army personnel to train. We have no problems on training in India, but that will come, if it comes, will be later.
So, what is the future of Pashtuns then, who came to India, the ones who are in India right now? I think they are all unorganized. So, what is the future? What do you see?
While they may retain their culture and language and something, they're all Indians. So, jo mil jaoge bajdar mein ban jaoge majdar. You can't have a separate identity.
But yeah. Nothing has been done. Because we are from that place, and we don't see any, anything like language you said. There's no one who is speaking that language now. So I have my uncle, he's 90 years old. Yesterday he saw your photo in the book. He wanted to come here, but he was not able to understand English. So he was very interested. What we are doing, what can be done.
So what are you doing?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
So, first of all, it has to be self-help. As a community of people, and especially, older people, it's their duty to pass on Pashto language at least. Pashto language, Pashto culture, Pashto cuisine. In Delhi, for example, there are a host of Pashto restaurants, Pashtun restaurants. Which refugees who came or students who came. You go to, what place is that? Lajpat Nagar. And they have kept it alive. So you have to do the same. Government of India, I think, is busy in too many things. Maybe the Maharashtra government, the state government, or maybe the local Nagpur municipality. But you have to help. You have to reach out to people and make sure they don't lose it. But ultimately, you will get merged. You see, now Pashtuns have been here since the time of Ghazni and Gauri. They've all merged with the people who came. They came along with women. They settled down over here. You've heard of Rohilas. You've heard of Tonk. Farooqabad, I mentioned Bhopal. You all get merged after a while, So, mil jaoge majdar, ban jaoge majdar. This is for a dialogue from Garam Hawa. It's an old movie.
Sir, ultimately, what is the future of Pashtun freedom movement? Will they have to wait for a strong government in Kabul, or they'll have to rise for their own freedom? In your study or in your research, would they prefer an independent state, or would they prefer merging with present-day Afghanistan?
You see, right now, the Pashtuns in Pakistan are certainly much better off in Pakistan than in Afghanistan, because the economic conditions, You know, the largest Pashtun city in the world is Karachi. It's not Peshawar, Jalalabad, Kabul or Kandahar. It is, so, but they also realize they have a problem with the Punjabi. There is a Pashtun Punjabi tension is there. And because of the pull of Afghanistan, or the other way around, you know, there are 31 million Pashtuns in Pakistan. There are about 14 or 15 million in Afghanistan. So will they attract, or will the pull factor be more important than the push factor? So it's all up in arms. And ultimately, as Tasneem had said, the Pashtuns themselves have to decide what is the way forward. They can't wait for other countries or other people to come and tell them, "Ye tum ye karo." They have to decide themselves, "Ki we have to do this." And now there is a thing called the Pashtun Jirga, you know, which is takes into account the Pashtun parties in Balochistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the PTM, and even the Taliban. Some elements have supported it. They themselves are framing a charter, the Pashtun Charter, which is the way forward. Because as I mentioned, you know, Pashtuns are dying, Pashtuns are killing, Pashtun children are dying. So they all say, you know, this is hardly the way we want our future generations to grow. So there is churning among the Pashtuns, but they are a critical mass. That is the important thing. You know, like in East Pakistan, the Bengalis were a critical mass. Pashtuns are a critical mass. So the day they decide they're being pushed to the wall enough and no more, and the Tariq-e-Taliban becomes stronger, or the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement becomes stronger, so up in the air.
Sir, I have a question. Sir, what is your vision on the women of Pashtuns? What are they, what is expected out of their, in their future? Will they have education, or they are still very subdued and, you know, crushed completely like what we hear about? Status of women. So what is the...
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I also studied this a lot. You see, because it is a tribal, conservative society, and as I mentioned, it's an honor-based society, and the most important part of honor is the behavior of women and the transgressions against women. Transgressions against women are treated as tor or black and can become white or spin only by death. So the women are guarded very, very jealously in the Pashtun society. But what Taliban is doing to the women is done nowhere. Not under Islam, not under Pashtun Wali. This is their own sort of a thing. There are 50 odd Muslim countries. Not one of them suppresses women to the extent that the Taliban are doing. Education is there everywhere. There's women's education in Pakistan among the Pashtuns. The Taliban have come up with their own. You see, either the 50 Islamic countries are right or the Taliban are right. And the Taliban says that we are not going to accept anybody else's version of Islam. We think ours is the true and pure Islam. But this is not so. It is not based on Pashtun Wali. After all, the person who liberated the women of Kabul first was King Amanullah in the 1920s, when he forced them to take off their veil, wear Western clothes, go to school, the Habibiya school for women, send them abroad for education, was all done by under Habibullah and then later on by Najibullah. In fact, under the biggest supporters of Najibullah were women because he liberated them. So it has nothing to do with Pashtun Wali. It's got also nothing to do with Islam. But this is the Taliban's own version of Deobandi, Wahhabi, Salafi mixture. We have come up with this. So it's a struggle in Afghanistan, no doubt. Women are very, very badly treated. And right now, no education, you can't work. It's nowhere else. But the international community has not been able to force them. And the reason why they will not change, that it is a part of their ideology. If once you start compromising on your ideology, then the whole movement will fall flat and people will leave them. Their own people will leave them. But it is not so in Pakistan. Right? Among the 31 million Pashtuns, it is not so. Yes, they are conservative. There's no doubt about that. They're very conservative. Baloch are also very conservative. But when they are pushed to the wall, it was the Baloch women who came to Islamabad leading a protest against missing persons and enforced killing. And they were all without veils, all without burqas, and they were talking to the very articulate. So similarly, you know, it's a tough condition right now. I can no way justify it, what Taliban are doing, but let's hope.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Sir, Uh, do we have time or? Okay.
So, in Pakistan, the madrasa system is very strong. And it is strong because the state has not been able to provide free education, though it is part of the constitution. They've not been able to provide education to the people. So a large number of young boys especially go to madrasas. And the teaching in the madrasas also have not changed. Yeah. It's only Islamic. So and this is not always so, if you look at history, the great architects and scientists of Islam also studied in madrasas. But there has been a deterioration, especially in Pakistan. So the Taliban grew up and were taught by Pakistani ulema in Pakistani madrasas. And that's now when the TTP says that you taught us jihad, was wajib, was valid in Afghanistan. Tell us now why it's not valid in Pakistan. And the Pakistani ulemas have not been able to come up with an answer. In Afghanistan, I think the education is even worse. So the students I think there are some good schools in the cities, large and urban area, but by and large in the rural areas, it is only this madrasa, only for boys, not for girls. So that's the tragedy, that you have an entire generation or two generations who will be without education.
Thank you, sir, very much. Thank you, everyone, for wholehearted participation and interaction. I want to share a few announcements that all the books related to this festival are available at the crossword stall outside. You can get your favorite books and get the sign from authors. Authors are also available here for the day. And take selfies for your socials. Don't forget to tag VLF and Maha Metro while sharing your stories. And another thing is that you please subscribe to the VLF YouTube channel so that you can relive these marvelous sessions on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe that. And now I will request Dilip Bhai to offer a token of appreciation to our author of the day. Thank you. And all of us present here, I am really thankful for this enthralling session with lots of gratitude. Thank you, everyone, and see you in the next session. Bye.